let's say George R. Martin, his books are huge, so he doesn't really trade off for character development or description. So we're talking about like smaller books in this case.
That's the author of the Game of Thrones,
Yes.
Fire and Ice.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can break this rule if your readers are willing to go along with it. I mean, if you want to, let me back up a second. There's still 100% of story. So what's his name, Martin? If he's doing 50% character development, 50% plot, and his readers are okay with it, that's fine. It's still an adventure, right?
Right.
I mean, just because his readers are willing to deal with that extra verbiage. Now, I think Tolkien got away with that too, right? Faulkner. God help me. Something happens and then.
So is
Here's the
fantasy
wood.
sci-fi a subgenre of adventure?
It's the other way around, but yeah, that was my response to it. That has to do with genre. The fantasy genre, you can go way longer. That's like,
Okay.
you know, industry. So
Right.
if you're just talking about action adventure, it's, you know, it's a little more streamlined, but when you're in the fantasy genre, then action adventure is almost like a subgenre of that. So adventure is kind of, you know, like the epic quest, you know, is like expected in epic fantasy. But yeah, that's more of, that has to do with the genre and the word counts that are expected and allowed for
Yeah.
that genre more so.
Thanks, CK. That's a good point to bring up genres, and I think the readers, they accept it and they expect it because you also owe them the definition of the world and the rules within the world, sci-fi and fantasy.
Exactly, world building.
Yep. Okay, Pat.
With Martin, he's also well established. People know who he is. If you're coming in with your first novel, it's going to be tough to get it published at 200,000 words or something. So
That too.
another one, Stephen King. He can bring these, you know, it or whatever, but he was already established. His first novel was a small one in comparison.
It's fine. I'll share personally here. My 12 novels in my submarine series, every one of them is 64,000 words plus or minus 4,000. Short, quick, boom. And I'll get hit for it. My reviews will say the good reviews will say 4 stars. I love the pace, I love this, I love that, authentic. Then they'll say, a little light on character development. And I'm like, guilty as charged. My character developed over 12 books as much as, you know, someone might develop them in 1 book or half a book. And that's okay, that's
You
what I'm
apply
doing.
the exact same criticism to Hornblower, you know, which the character was developed over 14 books or something.
I'll have to trust you on that one, I haven't read.
Well, James Bond.
Guilty as charged. Hey, I haven't read every book on the planet.
Yeah, it's just that sounds like that's your genre.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, oh, good.
Even then, I only read small bits of my genre. It's hard to read your own genre
Yeah.
too sometimes.
It is hard.
The irony is I'm going to tell you to do it when we talk about writing.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll just tell you to do it now. I'm going to back up. Pat, hold your thought. I just remembered in my notes, and I didn't mention it, but Richard, you made me think of it. You want to pass the credibility test in your plot, you want to get some people that are well-read in your genre to look at it before you write. Just share your idea of your plot, or, you know, kind of like the sanity check. And then after you're done, to make sure you've hit the tropes, you've got the excitement, you've got the abnormal new area, you've got the character that you want. And it'll save you a lot of heartache before you put it out there and you get bad reviews. Because you can fix it a lot faster than you think, if it's repairable. I mean, if you get the advice up front, you'll probably be okay. I wouldn't even write a book before I talk to one guy. I call him my mentor, buddy that writes. Like, if I don't go to him, I have another guy I go to. If I don't get at least one of them to say, yeah, it makes sense, I won't write the book. Pat.
Oh,
I did a lot of talking since you
No,
had an idea. I'm
that's
sorry.
right. I was going to use Ian Fleming or James Bond as another example where the character isn't well developed. He's thrown into action situation after situation, but we as the reader know very little about him. Maybe some of the newer movies give you more background, but the books don't tell you anything about him. It's just move the action. Here's the goal. Go do it.
Yep. James Bond is in my notes, I just didn't get to bringing them up. And the same buddy that I used as a sanity check, when we talk about getting on my book, 9, 10, 11, 12, he's like, some people might say that's going too far in your genre, military genre. But then he said, no, your characters are more like James Bond types, because they're not military heroes. They're actually mercenary misfits. They're all castaways from legitimate navies across the world, and they became more like James Bond. And their backgrounds are kind of murky, but they're going to do the same thing over and over because that's what they do. And if they develop, it's almost by accident. It takes you back to your point, Sandy, where because I was thrown into a room with a deranged woman, I had to develop, I had to grow. And that's how my characters grow. It's by accident. And like James Bond, I don't know how James Bond did not develop anymore over 40 years since even Fleming started. But like you said, at some point, people are interested and they want to know, and so you'll see that fleshed out in the movies a little bit. Okay, cool. Let's talk about writing for a little bit. After all, the name of this topic is writing adventure fiction. So let's talk about the actual words. Sandy, what is the first word up there?
Pace.
Yeah, you like that, don't you? You
Yeah.
want to go fast. Characters make quick decisions. Oh, wait a minute. We're down here. Pace. Tighten, 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 and then stop. Don't tighten forever. You'll go crazy. Seriously. Like, I want to go back and tighten my first book from 13 years ago, and I actually started doing that 2 years ago when I rewrote it until my mentor said, "Psh, everybody has thought of it, don't do it." Pat.
Can you give an example of what you mean by tighten?
Boy, will I. Hold on. If I can find my notes.
That's kind of what I was thinking too, but I like examples.
We'll do examples. I've gotten so excited with your feedback that oh, here we go. Okay. We touched on doing with less description and less character development. So that'll be inherent in the tightening. A lot of white space. So that dialogue, for example, is a good place to make this happen. If your character is going on and on and on and on, stop. Bring it back. Have a few lines. Let someone cough. Let someone knock something over. Let some action happen. Then more dialogue, because it'll turn out to be more white space. That being said, I'll make the point. Once we get to a lot of white space and a lot of action happening, it's like a sprint, and you don't want to have a sprint for a whole book. You're going to have paragraphs, and you're going to have complete chapters that are more slow. Like when I'm doing my submarine stuff, if I have a scene where they just escaped a torpedo by the hair on their head, I'll take a breather. I'll go back to something on land where someone's plotting and working on the next thing, because I want the heart to be beating at the end of the narrow escape from the torpedo, that's one like my trope. If people aren't running from torpedoes in my books, I fail. So, in my last book, actually, was back-to-back torpedo exchanges, but then I made sure that the chapters around them were more restful, more informative. Did I see a hand go up, or am I going to keep going? I'll keep going.
I think you psychically saw mine, because I was just thinking something, that when Sylvia and I write romance adventure, hers is like real life and mine is fantasy, or like after like a big heavy action scene, then it's good for the next chapter to be more like developing the romantic relationship.
Okay.
Just on what you said.
A lot of the examples we're looking for, Pat, are what not to do. One thing is varying the word choice. Like if I'm gonna expose something I did in my last novel that I had to fix, was my characters were pointing their noses at people too much. John pointed his nose at his wife. He pointed his nose at Cindy. He pointed his nose at Pat. Well, no. At some point, those become little speed bumps. You don't set the setting, you establish the setting. You don't race the race, you run the race, or you sprint the race. And if you see this word repetition, those become little speed bumps you want to avoid.
They also come across as a cliche if you use it too much also.
Yeah, and you do want to avoid cliches too. That's another speed bump. Dialogue tags is one way to speed things up. And there are two approaches here for dialogue tags. These are actually in your notes. You can either do, this is what I recommend, either he said, she said, he asked, she asked. Don't go down the road of they opined, or they retorted, or they snapped, because that's usually an attempt to cover weak dialogue. Let the dialogue carry itself. And eventually, once you see he said, she said, it's almost subconsciously ignored by the reader. So if you use those simpler tags, he said, she said, he asked, she asked, you'll help the reader move through the dialogue faster. Lanny.
I would tend to agree with you, but Terry Pratchett, my favorite line that he ever wrote was, this guy was falling off a cliff, and the line is, he opined. I cracked up loud.
I
So
love
if
that
he
one.
said, he said, I would be like, that's not so funny.
The opine, exceptions to every rule.
Yeah.
But you gotta use those exceptions.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Small doses.
That was really nice to share with the class.
Yeah, no, it was good. I liked it.
Option 2 is no dialogue tags.
Yeah,
This is where I'm
that's where
trying in my
Yeah.
last books.
Yeah, I
No
like
tags,
the dialogue.
just leave them out.
It's hard to do. That's why I had gotten trouble with my noses pointing. I'm still new at this. I've been writing for umpteen years, but when I switched just a year ago from he said, she said to no tags, because I thought it would flow better and get better pace. And it should if you do it right. But it has to be natural, so you're getting on the beats. You know, I have a character that smokes, so I can use that crutch. You know, he raised the moral portal. He flipped flint into flame with his Zippo lighter. It's not my line, that was horrible. Let me come up with some more examples, because we are running out of time. Your participation has been great thus far, so that's a good thing that we're running out of time. Because I was going to do exercises to have the dialogues that we're having, but we're having them. So I want to just make sure that I get the information out. Adverbs, adverbial clauses. Has anybody here ever been encouraged to use adverbs? Happily, successfully, in a successful manner?
I have in one English class in college, we were encouraged to write like mid-century writing. We had to go back and look at examples. Patricia Highsmith wrote The Talented Mr. Ripley. Her writing's full of adverbs, and it worked. So that was an example that the instructor or the professor used that I remember to this day. And I just went back and read one of her books recently, and look at that adverb, look at that adverb. And her editor would have shot her down, but she's considered classics.
Well, what do you think of it now? Now that you go back and read it, do they stand out as?
They stand out as awful when I read it, but again, when we had to do it, we had to write like it was 1950. It's not 1950.
No. And your tendency is to throw in everything that's in your brain onto paper. And when you're stuck trying to do that infinite effort, you start reaching for adverbs, right?
Yeah.
Happily. John walked across the room quickly. John trotted. Should have trotted to make it a better example. Or John strode. She ran quickly, or did she sprint? He walked slowly, he walked cautiously, or did he creep? You know this game. Yes, Sam?
So, first person versus third person. I'm sorry I haven't read your books, but is there one that's better for adventure fiction than another?
It is a good question, and that's my way of saying I don't have a good answer. I find that I can only tell you what I've done in my genre, so I'll do that. In military fiction, it's third person. And I see a lot, you just, we're gonna spend the rest of the time talking about this, we got 2 minutes. Careful about omniscience, slipping into omniscient voice. And I'm glad you brought this up. I'm gonna close my notes and we're gonna finish by answering Sandy's questions. You want to be in John's opinion. You want to be in one character's head for an entire scene. I'll even say an entire chapter. I don't even know, I violated that in the past, but at least within one scene. You want to be within your character's head. If we're gonna describe what's going on in this room, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people. We could have 10 perspectives, right? Point of view character. Obviously, if you're writing first person, you know who it is. It's going to be that first person, and you should keep that throughout the whole novel. I've seen first person in the paranormal novels. In fact, I'm an exception. I see more first person than not, and it's more of a familiar sort of thing. Like, hey, I just smushed that demon from the 7th level of hell using my whatever spell, and now I'm going to go have coffee with my boyfriend who doesn't listen to me. That works. Because you want this kind of a snarkiness in it, if that's a word, snarkiness. In the military genres, you're looking for more formal, so I went into it with third person, and that's what everybody does. But I stay within my character's head. I see too many people. There's a guy, I won't say his name, but he is a Tom Clancy writer. He's in my network of people that help each other. He is, so-and-so wrote the book of Tom Clancy novels. He's at that level. And he's jumping from head to head every paragraph. Because it's almost like a Martin thing, he can get away with it. So if we're gonna describe what's going on in this room, we could be in my head in 1 second, Sandy's head the next, and as soon as you jump from one head to another, you're an omniscient person, you're playing God. Try not to play God, you're just a writer, right? You have to be a little bit of God, because you're saying the whole world, you're making people do things, it's like mini God, but don't do omniscient. Please stick with third person, or first person, but stay within the head of your character for every scene. I'm gonna get off my soapbox now, and thank you all for great participation. Any last questions before we break up? We've got no time, but if there's a burning question, I'm here. Sandy?
Clive Cussler called and wanted you to be a partner, would you say yes?
I would, because I met his group, when I won that award,
Yeah.
I met his writing group, and he is very coaching, he looks for coachable people, he's honestly, genuinely in it to help his fans, and to help good writers be better writers. He's just a generally nice guy, so yes, I would.
Okay.
Thank you.